Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile, the cross-platform solution created by JetBrains for sharing Kotlin code across operating systems, has reached beta after 2 years in alpha stage. Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile, KMM from now on, is a very interesting technology with very well-defined use cases, as we will see throughout this video, which allow us to create multi-platform projects in which we can have a library written in the Kotlin language that will be compiled to native binaries that will be executed in each platform with native performance. In this video, I'm going to make a brief explanation about KMM in case you don't know it yet. Then we're going to see how it compares with Flutter, what advantages it has, what disadvantages it has, and what kind of audience it's intended for. Then, I'm going to create a very simple KMM application that will run on Android and iOS, that will share a Kotlin library so you can quickly see the first steps with KMM. If you want to know more about KMM as well as to understand what it is and how it's used, stay with me until the end of the video. Let's go! KMM is the proposal made by JetBrains, the creator of the popular IntelliJ code editor, to reuse code between applications that run on different platforms to save time and costs. It is not a framework as such, but rather a set of technologies brought together in an SDK that will allow us to share several layers of our application. For example, the business logic layer, the data layer, and even the layer of state management. So you only have to write them once. A fundamental difference with other solutions like Flutter or React Native is that KMM is designed to be used as a library, so the user interface part will have to be created natively. For example, in a mobile application, we will have the business logic and the data layer in the KMM module, while the visual part could be built with Jetpack Compose on Android and SwiftUI on iOS. This can be seen as an advantage or disadvantage. On one hand, if you are used to work with Flutter or React Native, it may seem that creating an application with KMM is going to require more work, since unlike these two, KMM does not provide you with a shared visual layer. However, there are some advantages that this approach has. Since you're going to use native visual elements, you don't have to worry at all that the final appearance of your application will give the user the feeling that it is not something native. The user will not be aware at all that your app is sharing code, since it will have the exact look and feel than a native app. You are going to work directly with APIs provided by the platform. You will always be able to use the latest components directly, without having to wait for anyone to adapt it. For example, in Flutter, although there are several Cupertino widgets that you can use, there are some native elements that are not ported to Flutter, so you have to look for substitutes. Another fundamental aspect to highlight about KMM is the choice of Kotlin as its programming language. Kotlin is a modern language and loved by many developers. I personally think it's a wonderful language, concise and elegant. A full-fledged evolution of Java. One of the most important technologies of KMM is Kotlin Native, which allows the Kotlin code in the shared module to be compiled directly into executable binaries, so that a virtual machine will not be required for said binaries to be executed. This is particularly useful on iOS, given the complexity of running code using a virtual machine. The final result is an application that we can consider as 100% native, since it will contain a part of the UI created with the SDK provided by the platform and a shared module compiled to a native binary. But how does KMM compare to Flutter? What advantages does it bring? And more importantly, what disadvantages does it have? Well, let's go part by part. Let's see first some fundamental differences between KMM and Flutter. Flutter is a cross-platform framework whose goal is to abstract as much as possible from the native platform, while KMM is a cross-platform SDK that aims to work together with the native platform tools and SDKs. Flutter's programming language is Dart, while KMM is Kotlin plus the platform language. Swift on iOS, C++ on desktop, etc. Flutter provides a UI toolkit with many widgets to create interfaces that may or may not be the same between different platforms. KMM is not intended to replace the creation of native UIs, so the UI must be created with native SDKs for each platform. Flutter creates executables that perform very well. However, each app needs to embed the Flutter engine to work correctly. KMM compiles libraries that are 100% native to the platform. It is not necessary to embed any engine or similar. I think that we can already consider Flutter as a more or less mature framework, with a rich community behind it, an ecosystem of packages and plugins, etc. KMM is still in beta phase, and although it could be considered as a candidate for a potential production app, there is still time for its components to stabilize and reach the stable phase. Finally, it remains to ask ourselves, who is KMM targeted at? Should I use Flutter or KMM for my next project? But before answering this question, let's create a super simple application with KMM to see how it works. For this example, we're going to create a very simple app that will only consume a REST API and will display the data on the screen. For this, I'm going to use an API from Rapid API that is going to provide me with a list of cities that I'm going to paint on the screen. We will create a shared class that will be in charge of obtaining the data. Then in Android, I will use Jetpack Compose to show it, and I will do the same in iOS with SwiftUI. The purpose of showing you this example is not to make a full tutorial with plenty of details. So I'm going to try to go a little fast so that we can skip to the last part of the video and draw conclusions. If you're interested in me doing a much more detailed tutorial, let me know by writing it down in the comments. The first thing is to create a project in Android Studio. For this, we will need to have previously installed the Kotlin Multiplatform Mobile plugin. We will select Kotlin Multiplatform App. I will change the name of the project and I will leave the rest of the options with their default value. Once the project is open, we switch to the project view to see what a KMM project looks like. We observe that we have an Android app and an iOS app folder. Each of them contains the native code necessary to be executed on each platform. Then we have a shared module, which is the Kotlin project, where we're going to put all of our shared resources. We open build.gradle from shared to start adding dependencies. In the source set common main, I'm going to add these dependencies. To make the API calls, I'm going to use Ktor, a cross-platform networking client. I add everything necessary, including a JSON serializer to be able to convert the data that arrives into Kotlin classes. I also add the coroutines dependency since this request will be done outside of the main thread. In addition to common main, Ktor needs a native networking library for each platform. To do this, I add the OKHTTP client on Android and the Darwin client for iOS. You also need to add this plugin on top for JSON serialization to work properly. We also add this flag in Gradle.properties, which will allow us to use the new memory management system. Don't worry about this. Depending on when you're watching this video, you may not need to do this. Now, we open build.gradle of the Android project to add coroutine support in the native part. And with this, we have all the necessary dependencies to create this sample app. Now, if you go to the shared module, you will see that there are two classes, greeting and platform, which have been created as an example. Remove both classes since we don't need them. Also, remove their namesakes in Android main and iOS main. Now, I'm going to create this file data.kt, which is where you must place the Rapid API key. If you clone this example, you will see that this file is not there. If you want to run it, you must create it with your Rapid API key. Now, I will create the API client class in charge of obtaining the cities. First, I'm going to create the necessary data classes that represent the cities and the response of their request. To make the request, we instantiate an HTTP client and configure it to automatically deserialize the JSON content that will arrive. I'm going to quickly go through all these settings so as not to stretch this part too far. Now, I will finally create the getCities method that will be in charge of obtaining the list of cities. Here you can see how the Ktor syntax is. If you want more details, I'll leave you a link in the video description. Now, we go with the creation of the interface in Android. Open main activity, remove these composables below, and create this instance of the class we just created. Now, I will modify the content of the app with a scaffold and add a title to the top bar. In the body of the scaffold, I create a scope to be able to execute the getCities method within a coroutine. And this state variable is where we're going to store the list of cities. Using a launched effect, I execute the API call the first time this composable is rendered. While the call is being made, we show a linear loading, and as soon as we have the cities, we list them inside a lazy column. Let's see if it works, but first we need to add the internet permission to Android manifest. We run the example and see that the list of cities loads correctly. Now we're going to do the same thing on iOS with SwiftUI. To do this, launch Xcode and open the ios.xc workspace file inside the iOS app folder. Open the content view.swift file and add this extension that will contain a view model with the content you see on the screen. In this case, we will use a variable marked with the published annotation, which is where we will store the cities obtained when calling the API. KMM uses this callback system automatically when we intend to call a method that is suspended. Now, we modify the content view as in Android. While loading the cities, we show a progress indicator, and once we get them, I show them inside a vstack in the form of a vertical list. We need to make this modification in iOS app.swift, and we can now run the application to see if it works. But first, I have to correct this naming error. Here we have the list of cities. With this small example, we have been able to verify how it's possible to share a class between Android and iOS. In a real application, we will be talking about sharing entire layers, as I said at the beginning of the video. For example, the entire use case layer with its logic can be in KMM. The entire data part with its respective repositories and data sources can also be in KMM. There are even some early stage libraries that help us to share view models to manage the state of the UI. So, is KMM a replacement for Flutter? Or can KMM kill Flutter in the near future? In my opinion, no. I think Flutter and KMM have different use cases. In my opinion, Flutter is more aimed at individual developers or small businesses, or for the creation of proofs of concept. Its focus is on abstracting as much as possible from the native platform, even to the point of providing us with a UI toolkit to also create the UI. This speeds up development and reduces costs, making it the ideal candidate for small teams or indie developers like me. On the other hand, KMM does not seek to replace either the look and feel or the optimizations that native applications have. It seeks to be a complement to existing applications. I think their focus is more on reducing costs and time to a certain extent in more corporate environments, where there are already Android and iOS teams. However, KMM still has a long way to go to reach a stable state to be put into large-scale production applications. So we're going to see how it evolves over time. What do you think is going to happen with KMM? Did you know about it before? And if so, are you considering using it for any of your projects? Leave me your thoughts in the comments and hit that like button if you think this video has been useful to you. Finally, consider subscribing for more news, guides and tutorials on KMM, Flutter and other mobile technologies. Thank you very much for watching this video until the end. I hope it has been useful. See you in the next video. Goodbye.